The fluorescent lights in Conference Room B hummed with the kind of institutional indifference that Maya Chen had grown to despise over her 7 years at Meridian Tech. She sat across from Vice President Richard Blackwood, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching his thin lips move as he delivered what he clearly believed was a carefully rehearsed speech. "Unfortunately, Maya, with the recent restructuring, we're going to have to let you go," Blackwood said, his voice carrying that practiced tone of fake sympathy. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content that executives seem to learn in some special class. It's not personal, of course. Just business. Maya nodded. She watched his pale blue eyes flicker with something. Relief, perhaps. Or satisfaction. He'd been waiting for this moment, she realized, planning it. The restructuring was convenient cover, but they both knew the truth. 3 months ago, she'd discovered the discrepancies in the quarterly reports. 3 months ago, she'd seen the phantom employees on payroll, the inflated vendor contracts, the carefully hidden embezzlement scheme that had Richard Blackwood's fingerprints all over it. 3 months ago, she'd been naive enough to think that doing the right thing would matter. "I understand," Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "When is my last day?" "Today, actually." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Security will escort you out. Standard procedure, of course it was. Fire her on a Friday afternoon when most of the staff had already left for the weekend. No awkward goodbyes, no questions from colleagues, no chance for her to access her computer or gather evidence that might have slipped through their digital purge. Your severance package is quite generous," he continued, sliding a manila envelope across the polished conference table. "All you need to do is sign the non-disclosure agreement." Maya picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside, she knew, would be a check and a legal document designed to buy her silence. Hush money wrapped in corporate respectability. She nodded again. "Excellent," Blackwood said, standing up. "I knew you'd be reasonable about this." "You're a smart woman, Maya. Too smart to throw away a good severance package over misunderstandings." As he walked toward the door, Maya finally spoke. "Richard?" He turned back, his hand already on the handle. "You're right," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I am smart." Something in her tone made him pause, but then his corporate mask slipped back into place. "I'm glad we understand each other." "Take care of yourself, Maya." The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo in the empty room. Maya sat alone, staring at the envelope in her hands, feeling 7 years of her life reduced to a single payoff. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, of innovative algorithms, of building the fraud detection system that had ironically exposed Blackwood's crimes. 7 years of believing that competence and integrity mattered in the corporate world. She thought about her mortgage, her student loans, the job market for senior data analysts in a city where tech companies whispered to each other about troublemakers and whistleblowers. Maya opened the envelope and pulled out the check. 6 months' salary. More money than she'd ever held at once, and all it would cost her was her soul. She thought about Marcus, her colleague who'd been laid off 6 months ago after asking too many questions about budget allocations. She thought about Jennifer from accounting, who'd been transferred to a dead-end position after noticing irregularities in expense reports. She thought about all the employees who'd been silenced, sidelined, or scared into compliance, while Blackwood systematically looted the company they'd helped build. Maya folded the check in half, then in half again, then once more. The security guard who escorted her to her desk was apologetic but firm. "Nothing personal, Miss Chen, just following orders." "I understand." Maya said as she packed her few personal items into a cardboard box. A photo of her parents, a small succulent plant, a coffee mug with "World's Okayest Data Analyst" printed on it, a secret Santa gift from last year that had made her laugh. As they walked toward the elevator, she saw a few of her remaining colleagues peeking over their cubicle walls, their faces carefully neutral. They'd learned to keep their heads down, to avoid eye contact with the condemned. Maya didn't blame them. She'd been the same way when it happened to others. The elevator ride down 15 floors felt like a descent into purgatory. In the lobby, the security guard handed her the box and gestured toward the revolving doors. "Good luck, Ms. Chen," he said, and Maya could tell he meant it. Outside, the October evening air was sharp with the promise of winter. Maya stood on the sidewalk, clutching her box of personal effects, watching the stream of people heading home from work. Normal people with normal jobs who didn't have to worry about corporate corruption or moral compromises. She pulled out her phone and called the one person she knew would understand. "David? It's Maya. They fired me." Her brother's voice came through tinny but warm. "Jesus. Maya, are you okay? What happened?" "It's a long story. Can I come over?" "Of course." Doors unlocked. David lived in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, the kind of place where struggling musicians and freelance programmers could afford rent. Maya found him in his cluttered office, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying cascading lines of code. "They offered me money to stay quiet," Maya said, collapsing into the battered leather chair across from his desk. "A lot of money." David minimized his work windows and turned to face her. At 32, he was 2 years younger than Maya, but looked older. His dark hair already showing threads of silver from years of late nights and stress. He'd been blacklisted from the corporate tech world after exposing security vulnerabilities that his former employer had preferred to ignore. "How much money?" he asked. Maya showed him the check. David whistled low. "That's never work again money," he said. "At least, not in this city." "I know." Maya stared at the pieces of paper in her hands. "They're stealing millions, David. Phantom employees, fake contracts, kickbacks, the whole thing. And they're going to get away with it because everyone's too scared or too well paid to speak up." "So, what are you going to do?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of Friday night in the city, people laughing, music spilling from bars, the ordinary chaos of lives being lived without the weight of impossible choices. "I'm going to destroy him," she said finally. David raised an eyebrow. "Blackwood?" "All of them. But him especially." Maya felt something cold and sharp crystallizing in her chest. "He thinks I'm just another corporate drone who'll take the money and disappear. He has no idea who he's dealing with." "Maya." David's voice carried a note of warning. "These people have lawyers. They have connections. If you go after them and fail—" "I won't fail." Maya stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the warehouse district. "I built their fraud detection system, remember? I know every algorithm, every database, every security protocol. They fired the one person who actually understood how their technology worked. They also wiped your access and probably changed all the passwords." Maya smiled for the first time since walking into conference room B. "You're assuming I didn't plan for this possibility?" She turned back to face her brother, and David saw something in her expression that made him lean forward. "6 months ago, when I first started noticing the irregularities, I created a backup system," Maya continued, "a mirror of their entire financial database, updated in real time through a secondary API that they didn't even know existed. It's all sitting on a server farm in Iceland, completely outside their jurisdiction." "That's—" David paused, processing the implications. "That's either brilliant or completely insane." "Both," Maya admitted. "I told myself it was just insurance, in case they tried to destroy evidence. but deep down, I think I knew it would come to this. David was quiet for a moment, staring at the fragments of the severance check scattered on his desk. What do you need from me? Your skills, your contacts, and about 3 months of your life. Maya, I can't afford to. She pulled out her wallet and extracted a credit card. Emergency fund. I've been saving for years, thinking I might start my own company someday. Turns out I was saving for a war. David looked at the card, then back at his sister. In 7 years of corporate life, he'd watched her gradually lose the fire that had made her such a formidable programmer in college. Now he could see it flickering back to life, fed by anger and purpose. What's the plan? He asked. Maya moved to his whiteboard and picked up a marker. First, we're going to document everything. Every fraudulent transaction, every fake employee, every kickback. We're going to build a case so airtight that not even Meridian's army of lawyers can punch holes in it. She drew a circle labeled evidence and began connecting lines to other circles. Then we're going to identify all the co-conspirators. Blackwood isn't working alone. This kind of systematic fraud requires help from accounting, HR, maybe even some board members. More circles. More connections. And then? David asked. Maya capped the marker and stepped back. Then we're going to time the revelation for maximum damage. Not just to Blackwood, but to the entire company. I want Meridian's stock price to crater. I want federal investigations. I want congressional hearings. That's a lot of innocent people who'll get hurt in the crossfire. You think I don't know that? Maya's voice carried a sharp edge. You think I haven't thought about my former colleagues who will lose their jobs? But this cancer has been growing for years, and everyone who could have stopped it chose to look the other way. Sometimes you have to burn down the forest to stop the disease from spreading. David studied her face, seeing a determination that both impressed and worried him. And what about Blackwood specifically? Maya's smile was cold. By the time I'm finished with him, Richard Blackwood will be lucky if he can get a job managing a McDonald's. His reputation will be so thoroughly destroyed that his own mother won't trust him with her grocery money. The next 3 months were a blur of 18-hour days and obsessive detective work. Maya and David transformed the warehouse into a war room, with whiteboards covering every wall and multiple computers running analysis programs around the clock. They lived on takeout and caffeine, driven by a shared fury at the system that had chewed them up and spat them out. The evidence was even worse than Maya had initially suspected. The phantom employees weren't just padding the payroll, they were elaborate shell companies designed to funnel money into offshore accounts. The vendor contracts weren't just inflated, they were completely fabricated, with payments going to companies that existed only on paper. And the scope of the conspiracy reached higher than she'd imagined, involving not just Blackwood, but 2 other VPs, and at least 1 board member. Jesus, David said one night in December, staring at a spreadsheet that showed the money trail. They've stolen almost $40 million over the past 3 years. And that's just what we can prove, Maya replied without looking up from her own screen. The real number is probably double that. They'd also been busy on other fronts. David's contacts in the hacker community had helped them gather information about Blackwood's personal life, his gambling debts, his expensive divorce, his son's drug problems. Not to blackmail him, Maya insisted, but to understand his motivations and vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Maya had been carefully cultivating relationships with journalists, federal investigators, and congressional staffers. She'd learned that timing was everything in the modern scandal ecosystem. Release information too early, and it would get buried in the news cycle. Too late, and lawyers would have time to prepare defenses. The quarterly board meeting is next week, Maya said, highlighting a date on the calendar. That's when Blackwood will present the annual financial report. That's when we strike. You sure you want to do this? David asked. Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Maya looked around the warehouse that had become her home for the past 3 months. Evidence boxes stacked to the ceiling, computer screens displaying the digital entrails of corporate corruption, empty coffee cups and takeout containers marking the sites of countless late-night strategy sessions. She thought about the life she'd lost, the steady paycheck, the health insurance, the illusion of security that came with corporate employment. Then she thought about the life she'd found, the clarity of purpose, the satisfaction of hunting down truth in a wilderness of lies, the knowledge that she was finally fighting for something that mattered. "I'm sure," she said. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9:47 a.m. when the Securities and Exchange Commission received a comprehensive package detailing 3 years of systematic fraud at Meridian Tech. By 10:15, federal agents were executing search warrants at the company's headquarters. The second domino fell at 11:23 a.m. when the FBI raided Richard Blackwood's suburban home, seizing computers, financial records, and a safe containing over $200,000 in cash. The third domino fell at 2:30 p.m. when the Washington Post published the first in a series of investigative articles titled The Meridian Papers, detailing how a cabal of executives had systematically looted one of the city's most promising tech companies. By the end of the week, Meridian's stock price had fallen 78%. 3 executives had been arrested. The board had called an emergency meeting to fire the CEO. And Richard Blackwood was sitting in federal custody, denied bail due to his history of hiding assets in offshore accounts. Maya watched it all unfold from a coffee shop across the street from Meridian's headquarters, sipping a latte and reading news coverage on her laptop. She'd been interviewed by reporters, of course, but always by phone and never on camera. Let them focus on the evidence, not the messenger. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Channel 7 is running a segment on whistleblower protections. They want to interview you." Maya typed back, "Pass. I'm not the story." But she was, of course. In the coming weeks, she'd become the face of corporate accountability, invited to speak at conferences and congressional hearings. Job offers would pour in from companies eager to hire someone with her combination of technical skills and moral courage. The irony wasn't lost on her. By destroying her corporate career, she'd inadvertently launched a much more successful one. On a cold February morning, 4 months after that meeting in Conference Room B, Maya sat in federal court watching Richard Blackwood's sentencing hearing. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of his crimes finally exposed. His lawyer made a final plea for leniency, citing Blackwood's cooperation with investigators and his family circumstances. Blackwood himself offered a brief apology, his voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. The judge was unmoved. "Mr. Blackwood, your actions didn't just steal money, they stole trust. They betrayed the faith of employees, investors, and customers who believed in Meridian Technologies. The court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole before serving at least 5 years. As the bailiff led Blackwood away, he caught Maya's eye across the courtroom. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Maya saw not the arrogant executive who had fired her, but a broken man finally facing the consequences of his choices. Maya felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no sense of triumph or vindication. Just a quiet certainty that justice had been served, and that she'd kept her promise to herself. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Maya, shouting questions about her plans and her feelings about the verdict. She paused on the steps, looking up at the gray February sky, and thought about the question they weren't asking. Was it worth it? The answer was complicated. She'd lost her old life but found her purpose. She'd destroyed her career but discovered her calling. She'd made enemies but also allies she never could have imagined. "Ms. Chen," a reporter called out, "what would you say to other potential whistleblowers who might be afraid to come forward?" Maya considered the question, thinking about all the people who'd stayed silent, who'd taken their severance packages and their NDAs and disappeared into corporate obscurity. "I'd say that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing," she replied. "And sometimes the scariest decision you'll ever make is also the most necessary one." As she walked away from the courthouse, Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through the dozens of messages from job recruiters, journalists, and advocacy groups. Tomorrow, she would start the next chapter of her life, whatever that might look like. But today, she was simply a woman who had nodded politely when injustice tried to silence her, then spent 4 months proving that sometimes the quietest voices can make the loudest noise. The city stretched out before her, full of other companies, other secrets, other executives who believed they were too powerful to face consequences. Maya smiled and walked toward her future, knowing that the war against corporate corruption was far from over, and knowing that she was exactly where she belonged, on the front lines, fighting for truth in a world that had forgotten what it looked like.